A genius with an IQ of 300 faces his most dangerous and evil foe, leading to a tense confrontation. One night in Margar, Georgia, a man being pursued by an unseen assailant seeks refuge under a bridge. His attacker catches up, shoots him multiple times in the back, collects the shell casings, beats the body, and hides it under cardboard scraps. The next morning, Jack Reacher, a former military man traveling across the US with just a set of clothes, a toothbrush, and some cash, arrives in Margar to pay tribute to Blind Blake, a legendary blues musician who recently passed away in the town. After arriving, Jack stops at a diner for a bite. He notices a tense argument between a couple over a tip, with the man behaving aggressively. Jack's presence causes the man to apologize and calm down. Before Jack can try the pie, the diner is swarmed by police. Officers Stevenson and Baker, on edge, order Jack to comply, even struggling to cuff him and resorting to using plastic zip ties. At the station, Sheriff Roscoe Conlin and Detective Oscar Finley question Jack about a crime committed near the bridge the previous night. The victim's swollen fingers prevent proper identification. Jack listens intently, remaining calm, and insists he doesn't need a lawyer since he didn't commit the crime. He admits to having a complicated past, but denies any involvement in this incident. Roscoe learns Jack leads a secretive life, with no driver's license, bank cards, or social media, making him nearly untraceable. Oscar also discovers Jack has an older brother named Joe, whose current whereabouts are unknown. Despite past run-ins with the law, Jack claims he's no saint, but wasn't involved in this case. Jack continues to assert his innocence, even deducing that the crime involved 3 people: a professional shooter, a man who beat the corpse, and a nervous thug who covered up the scene. Despite Jack's logical analysis, Oscar keeps him in a cell until his alibi can be verified. Reflecting on his past, Jack recalls trouble always seems to follow him. He remembers an incident from his youth, when he and his brother, Joe, faced a gang of bullies, but stood their ground, effortlessly handling the situation. Meanwhile, Sheriff Roscoe Conlin offers Jack a coffee, sensing he isn't a typical criminal. Their conversation is interrupted when Oscar questions financier Paul Hubble, whose phone number was found in the victim's shoe. Nervous and glancing at a black car outside, Hubble eventually confesses to the crime, though his confession lacks details. Recognizing Hubble's confession as a desperate attempt to escape danger, Jack requests to leave and easily frees himself from the plastic zip ties. In a private conversation, Jack demonstrates his sharp observational skills, noting details about Oscar's recent divorce, his efforts to quit smoking, and his academic background. Jack also suspects a link between Officer Stevenson and Hubble, sensing Stevenson is hiding something. During interrogation, Stevenson confirms Hubble's alibi, further suggesting his innocence. Realizing Jack might be their best chance to uncover the truth, Oscar decides to keep both Jack and Hubble in jail temporarily. During processing, an officer conducts a thorough search, but Jack warns him to back off. By morning, Jack and Hubble are placed in a block with dangerous inmates. When the inmates cause trouble and break Oscar's glasses, Jack steps in, swiftly taking down the gang leader to protect Hubble. Grateful, Hubble confesses that he was a victim of a financial scam orchestrated by his boss and fears for his family's safety if he doesn't take the fall. Later, as Jack and Hubble head to the bathroom, they are ambushed by a group of thugs armed with shivs. Demonstrating his superior strength and agility, Jack swiftly takes down the gang single-handedly, leaving them incapacitated before the guards arrive. After reviewing Jack's military file, which highlights his heroics and numerous awards, Roscoe confirms Jack's alibi, leading to both Jack and Hubble's release. Although Jack plans to leave town, Roscoe invites him to stay and even asks him on a date. Jack visits a barber shop for a trim and learns from the barber that the town is actually controlled by a businessman named Kleiner, not the mayor. Just then, Kleiner's son arrives in a pickup truck and tries to intimidate Jack, but quickly learns that Jack isn't easily threatened. Later, Jack returns to the police station to find that a second crime has been committed. Shockingly, the second victim is his older brother Joe, with whom Jack had lost contact years ago. Fueled by a burning desire for revenge, Jack vows to track down and punish those responsible for his brother's murder. That evening, as Jack sets out to investigate, Oscar asks Sheriff Roscoe to keep an eye on him. Aware of her following him, Jack continues his mission and meets with Paul Hubble to dig deeper into the businessman's connections. When Jack and Hubble visit Hubble's home, they find it empty. Jack notices grass on Hubble's shoes, suggesting he may have been at the crime scene. Further investigation reveals that the prison inmates had planned to attack Hubble, but mistakenly targeted Jack due to their similar glasses. Jack inspects the crime scene and deduces the shooter's position, noting that while the work was professional, it was also personal. A rifle could have been used from a distance, implying a deeper connection to the victim. Jack fears that Hubble may already be dead, knowing too much and posing a threat to powerful people in town. Later that night, Jack returns to his motel and encounters 4 drunk men. He quickly deduces they were hired by Kleiner's son and paid $100 each. Not wanting a prolonged confrontation, Jack warns them that he'll break the arms of 3, leaving the 4th to take them to the hospital. The thugs, ignoring Jack's warning, attack him but quickly suffer the injuries he promised before fleeing. Observing from a distance, Roscoe realizes that Jack is highly trained and a significant threat. The next morning, news breaks of 2 bodies discovered at the police chief's house. Rushing to the scene, Roscoe and Jack are met with a gruesome sight. The police chief has been crucified and castrated, while his wife has been brutally killed. This horrifying act points to the same criminals behind the recent murders, making it likely that Hubble is also dead. Realizing that many police officers are compromised by powerful businessmen, Jack, Roscoe, and Oscar know they can only trust each other. Worried for Hubble's family's safety, Roscoe stays behind to protect them, while Jack and Oscar attend a city meeting. Mayor Grover Till is appointed the new police chief, but townspeople are nervous, viewing Jack with suspicion. Kleiner Sr. vows to help catch the criminals responsible. Till orders a search for suspects seeking revenge on the sheriff, but Jack finds this approach suspicious. Returning to Hubble's house, Jack advises his wife to pack quickly. Spotting a black sedan filled with Latino mercenaries, as the barber had warned him, Jack gathers Hubble's wife and children, and with Roscoe, they hand them over to Oscar's FBI friend for protection. Jack then arranges a meeting with the prison guard, posing as a detective. However, the guard sees through his act, and Jack is caught in a trap. The mercenaries force him into the trunk of a car, but Jack fights back despite sustaining injuries, escaping just as patrol police arrive. Back at the station, Jack uncovers that his brother Joe had been working for a Secret Service agency investigating financial crimes, which likely led to his death. The mercenaries, though dangerous, are merely pawns in a larger operation. Needing a break, Jack and Roscoe visit a bar across the state line, where they relax and share a romantic dance. On their way back, they are stopped by a flooded road, and Jack, sensing danger, prepares for a confrontation. It turns out to be a natural obstacle, forcing Jack and Roscoe to stay the night in town. They check into a nearby motel, grab snacks, and bond over the fact that neither has close family. The next morning, they return to Roscoe's house, only to find the door broken open and a chilling message from the criminals, warning them to prepare for war. Furious at the intrusion in her hometown, Roscoe refuses to let outsiders take control. Trusting Jack, she gives him a gun that once belonged to her late father's friend. With the house no longer safe, they pack up and leave, testing the gun's accuracy beforehand. They meet Oscar and head to the morgue, where they learn the first victim was a trucker whose legal interests were protected by Kleiner's company. Soon after, Joe's assistant from the Secret Service contacts Jack. She was close to Joe and is devastated by his death. Although she has limited information, she reveals Joe had been investigating counterfeit money and was about to expose a major financial scandal. This could have led to a crackdown on fake currency, but someone silenced him before he could act. With growing evidence pointing to Kleiner's involvement, Jack asks Joe's assistant to prepare documents on his work. Jack, Oscar, and Roscoe divide tasks to continue their investigation. Roscoe heads back to the police station, pretending to investigate the criminals responsible for the police chief's murder. The mayor believes she's following his orders, checking suspects with potential motives for revenge. However, Stevenson notices something odd about Roscoe's behavior and tries to question her. Suspecting he may be aligned with the mayor and businessmen, she remains cautious. Meanwhile, Oscar tracks down the escaped prison guard, Spivey, in another state. Breaking into Spivey's house, he discovers multiple calls to Kleiner's company on the guard's phone. A vigilant neighbor mistakes Oscar for a burglar, leading local police to arrest and beat him. Roscoe arrives just in time to explain the situation and free Oscar. Back on the trail, Jack uses a fake identity to meet with the head of the legal department at the company defending the trucker. Realizing no one will willingly talk, Jack resorts to choking the man with a telephone cord until he agrees to share information. Later, Jack, Oscar, and Roscoe regroup at a roadside cafe, reviewing the clues they've gathered. While the evidence points to Kleiner and Spivey, they realize they still lack the substantial proof needed to justify breaking into Kleiner's office. On their way, Jack suggests stopping to feed a neglected dog, which belonged to the owner's deceased uncle. The dog hadn't been properly cared for, and Oscar urges Jack to show compassion, warning that neglect could lead to legal trouble. Upon arriving at Kleiner's company office, Jack notices movers transporting large amounts of pet food and realizes there are no surveillance cameras inside. The office is filled with taxidermy, reflecting the Kleiner family's passion for hunting. When Oscar questions Kleiner about Spivey's calls and the trucker's defense, Kleiner has prepared responses, advising them to stop harassing him and focus on finding the real criminals. His dismissive attitude angers Oscar, who vows to uncover the truth. After the meeting, Jack suggests Oscar find a motel outside of town for safety, suspecting they may become targets. Jack and Roscoe suspect the movers were actually transporting money hidden in the pet food. Later, Roscoe encounters Kleiner Jr., who warns her that Jack is a dangerous criminal with a history of harming both military personnel and civilians. Unconvinced, and suspecting Kleiner Jr.'s involvement in the counterfeiting operation, Roscoe tells him to stay away from her. That evening, Oscar meets Hubbell's former boss and learns Hubbell left the company over a year ago. Hubbell had been lying to his family about his whereabouts, and no one knows where he was actually working. Returning to the motel, Oscar tries to unwind with a drink and meets a woman who notices his loneliness. Despite her interest, Oscar, still grieving over his ex-wife, declines her company, unable to move on. Meanwhile, Jack revisits the bar where Spivey was last seen, trying to gather information from a local patron. The bouncer quickly shuts him down, refusing to let him ask questions. Unfazed, Jack takes down the bouncer, forcing him to reveal that Spivey had left with 2 Latino mercenaries. As Jack exits the bar, he spots the same mercenaries tailing him. He heads back inside, grabs a pair of latex gloves, and leaves the bar, realizing the mercenaries are still following. Jack devises a plan, leading the mercenaries to a remote spot and making a daring escape by jumping out of his moving vehicle. Confused but determined, the mercenaries investigate the abandoned car, only for Jack to ambush them, shooting them in the back. While searching their bodies, Jack discovers Spivey's corpse already in the trunk. Calmly, he breaks the mercenaries' legs and stuffs them into the trunk with Spivey's body. Later, Oscar calls to inform Jack that Joe's burned car has been found. They head to the scene to examine the charred remains of the SUV, unsure if it truly belonged to Jack's brother. After noting the VIN number for verification, Jack confesses to Oscar that he killed the 2 mercenaries and found Spivey's body. Roscoe, learning that the killings weren't in self-defense but driven by revenge, feels conflicted. However, Roscoe's personal feelings for Jack lead her to sympathize with him, and she becomes curious about what really happened in Baghdad, something Kleiner Jr. had hinted at. Jack explains that during his time there, he protected local children by executing men who were tormenting them. To get rid of the car and bodies, Jack and Roscoe drive to the nearest airport, where Jack temporarily disables the security cameras. Roscoe parks the car and wipes away any fingerprints. They then spend the night at a nearby hotel, with Jack renting a suite using the cash he took from the dead mercenaries. As a precaution, he sets up toothpicks on the door to detect any intruders. Meanwhile, Joe's assistant calls, promising to have the case files ready by the next evening. Roscoe, feeling less stressed about their situation, joins Jack in the shower, leading to a moment of intimacy between them. The next morning, Mayor Till orders Oscar to focus on finding the repeat offenders who attacked the police chief. Knowing he must comply or risk being fired for his previous treatment of Kleiner Sr., Oscar reluctantly agrees. Around the same time, Peard contacts them, claiming to have valuable information and suggesting a meeting. After ensuring Hubbell's wife and children are safe, Peard gives them a gun for protection and then heads out to meet Jack and Roscoe. Jack and Roscoe also visit the widow of the deceased trucker, who reveals her suspicions that her husband was involved in illegal activities, as his lifestyle didn't match his income. She guessed he was stealing air conditioners, but Jack suspects something more complex: counterfeit money being produced in South America and transported to Kleiner in the US. Later, Jack and Roscoe meet with Peard, who confirms that Joe had rented the burned car. They also learn which hotel Joe stayed at, and they go there to collect his personal belongings. However, they discover that mercenaries had already arrived, taking a briefcase full of documents and throwing the remaining items into a dumpster. Jack sifts through the discarded belongings and finds a new clue left by his late brother. As they piece together the evidence, the Latino mercenaries return, guns blazing, intent on killing Jack and Roscoe. In the chaos, Jack urges Roscoe to split up, leading the attackers away from her. He manages to take down one of the mercenaries, but the other corners him. In a tense moment, Roscoe appears and kills the second mercenary, saving Jack. Shaken and frustrated, Roscoe expresses her anger at Jack for putting her in danger. Jack explains that he had no choice because she's the only person that truly matters to him. Meanwhile, Oscar grows suspicious, realizing that the mercenaries were able to track them down. He concludes that someone within the police department must have overheard his conversation with Peard and set up the ambush. Oscar, Roscoe, and Jack regroup to review the latest clues. Among Joe's belongings, they find 3 phone numbers. After some calls, they learn that one number belongs to an environmental agency, while the other 2 are linked to economics professors from neighboring states. As the case becomes more convoluted, Jack contacts Frances Neagle, a private investigator he trusts, asking her to dig deeper into the backgrounds of the professors, particularly focusing on their trips to Europe. With hopes that Joe's assistant, Molly, will provide vital documents, the trio heads to the train station. They spot Molly in the distance, but as time passes without her approaching, Jack grows worried. He goes to search for her and finds her gravely injured, bleeding out, with the documents stolen. Not wanting to become suspects, the trio quickly flees, leaving Molly's body behind in a tunnel. On their way to the station, they notice a mistreated dog and decide to free it, teaching the abusive owner a harsh lesson. Afterward, they head to Hubbell's house, where Jack takes a new, bullet-free car and drives to Kleiner's cattle farm. He's troubled by Kleiner's unusually large purchases of feed, and while there, he notices grass similar to what he saw on Hubbell's shoes. At the station, Jack spots an insulting message scrawled on Roscoe's car. Knowing who's responsible, he tracks down Kleiner Jr. at a nearby cafe. Jack tries to stay calm, but when Kleiner Jr. insults Roscoe again, Jack feels compelled to defend her honor. Kleiner Jr. makes a crude remark about Roscoe, earning himself a hard slap. His friends join the confrontation, but Jack easily takes down the group. The fight is interrupted when Oscar and Roscoe arrive. Kleiner Sr., witnessing the altercation, warns them to stop, hinting that Jack could be arrested if things escalate. Oscar smooths things over, aware that Kleiner Sr. wouldn't want his son's behavior exposed in court. Meanwhile, Mayor Till fires Roscoe for neglecting her duties. With most of their leads lost, Jack starts investigating the late Detective Gray, a friend of Roscoe's father. Remembering a box with a gun, Jack examines it and finds a key, which leads them to a barbershop. There, Oscar, Roscoe, and Jack discover a chest containing personal items and documents that Gray had collected during his last investigation. Jack remains puzzled by Kleiner Sr.'s large feed purchases, noticing that Kleiner bought 116 cows, just shy of the 120 needed to be considered a legitimate farmer. In Gray's documents, they uncover evidence that a charitable foundation is a front for laundering counterfeit money, with expenses far exceeding its donations. It's becoming increasingly clear that Kleiner Sr. is a criminal, using the town as a hub for distributing counterfeit money to support other criminals and terrorists. Amid all this, Jack reflects on his lifelong stubbornness and uncompromising nature. He recalls a time when he and his brother beat up some bullies, one of whom was a general's son. Their father could have faced serious repercussions at work, and they were pressured to apologize. But Jack never wavered from his principles. Shortly after, Nagel contacts Jack with useful information and asks to meet. Jack believes he knows her well enough to find her easily, but it's Nagel who predicts his moves and meets him at the right cafe. Through her investigation, Nagel discovered a small town in Arkansas that had suffered a similar fate. A series of crimes led to the local police being wiped out, and the town was ruined after its water supply was contaminated. When Jack visits the town and speaks to a local, he realizes it was destroyed by a small company also owned by Kleiner Sr. Meanwhile, Roscoe follows up on Jack's suspicions and heads to the morgue. After speaking with a morgue worker, she uncovers that Gray's death wasn't a suicide as it appeared. He was struck on the head, and the injury was staged to look like a suicide attempt. The wound even had traces resembling diamond-shaped corners, leading Roscoe to believe the mayor was behind it. Determined to confront Mayor Teal, Roscoe beats him during the altercation. As a result, she's not only fired, but also faces arrest for assault. Oscar helps her escape the town, and she ultimately decides to take over as the bodyguard for Hubbell's family, replacing Peard. That evening, Nagel and Jack meet with some police officers assisting in their investigation, and learn that a hitman known as Viking might be involved. On their way back, they discover one of the cops has been bribed by the businessman. The corrupt cop kills his partner and tries to execute Nagel and Jack, but they narrowly escape by causing a car accident. The corrupt cop, knowing the consequences of failure, decides to drown himself rather than face his superiors. Later that night, Oscar breaks into Kleiner Sr.'s office, hoping to find evidence of his guilt. Instead, he finds Kleiner Sr.'s dead body, realizing the businessman wasn't the true mastermind behind the crimes. Upon learning of this, Jack deduces that a key figure in the criminal organization is based in Venezuela. With Kleiner Sr. out of the picture, it becomes vital to figure out what happens next, but they need surveillance and a discreet vehicle. Back at the station, Oscar plays it cool, pretending to know nothing about the recent events. Mayor Teal suspends him from the investigation due to his conflict with the deceased, and Teal's son even takes a swing at Oscar. Undeterred, Jack and Oscar rent an old, inconspicuous car from a mechanic and head into the woods to monitor Kleiner's operations. During their surveillance of Kleiner Sr.'s former company, Oscar opens up about his past, revealing that he left town after his wife's death. They never divorced, but he felt responsible for her passing and chose to isolate himself, even quitting smoking. While watching, they spot Kleiner Sr.'s nephew leaving in a truck and decide to follow him, suspecting he's transporting counterfeit money. That night, the driver stops at a motel, and after he goes to bed, Jack and Oscar cautiously check the truck, only to find it empty. With another lead gone cold, Jack contacts the professors, assuming they've returned from Europe. One has already been killed, but the second professor is still alive. Jack urges her to seek police protection before he arrives. Meanwhile, Roscoe checks in on Hubbell's wife and children to ensure their safety while Peard is away. That evening, she notices a suspicious car nearby and suspects they're being followed. She sends Charlie and the kids to the basement and heads into the woods toward a light source, discovering a vehicle with Latino mercenaries. When they spot her, they begin hunting her down. Roscoe instructs Hubbell's family to flee and hide in the forest while she distracts the mercenaries. Acting quickly, she injures one, and when the second mercenary tries to use a grenade, Roscoe blinds him with wooden splinters, causing him to drop it. The grenade explodes, killing him. The next morning, Roscoe reunites with Charlie and the kids. They call Peard and head to a nearby cafe. Realizing her family is in danger, Charlie admits that she knew about her husband's involvement a year ago. Kleiner Sr. had offered Hubbell a lucrative deal, which turned out to be a trap. Hubbell became entangled in financial scams and was forced to comply after witnessing one of the guilty employees being crucified. Soon, Peard arrives and moves everyone to a safer location. Meanwhile, Jack arrives in New York and buys a suit to meet with the professor, who explains that the counterfeit money Kleiner Sr. was distributing wasn't just fake. He was producing perfect $100 bills, likely using special paper and presses capable of creating notes indistinguishable from real ones. Jack arranges for a former military officer among the police to protect the professor in the coming days. As Jack leaves the precinct, he realizes he's being followed. He lures the mercenary into a quiet alley and, after a struggle, professionally incapacitates and kills him. That evening, Stevenson and his wife discuss moving away due to the city's dangers and their upcoming child. Unfortunately, it's too late. 4 criminals in latex suits responsible for the crimes in Margrave arrive at their home. When Jack returns to town, he and Oscar attend Kleiner Sr.'s funeral but face hostility from the crowd. Soon after, they learn that Stevenson and his wife have been executed. The nature of their injuries, Stevenson being tortured and his pregnant wife mistreated, confirms that Stevenson wasn't involved with the criminals. Mayor Teal fires Oscar, blaming him for the failure to capture the criminals and restore order. Feeling a strong sense of duty, Oscar decides to inform Stevenson's parents about the tragedy. Meanwhile, Jack resolves to question the only surviving active police officer, Baker, suspecting Baker might be colluding with the gang in white latex suits. Jack pretends to be an ally, claiming he wants to search Hubbell's house for evidence. He sets a trap by purchasing clothing and equipment for an ambush. Jack turns on the lights, plays loud music, paints his face for battle, and hides in the bushes. A pickup truck soon arrives with armed thugs, including Kleiner Sr.'s nephew. The 4 men in white suits enter the house, unaware that Jack is lying in wait. As they search the house, Jack takes out their driver and signals with a light. He lures one of the criminals outside and silently takes him out. Jack then opens the front door, kills the second thug, and hides inside. The third thug tries to track him by the wet footprints but falls into Jack's trap, becoming the next victim. Only Kleiner Sr.'s nephew remains. He shoots at Jack and attacks him with a crowbar. During the struggle, the criminal hits Jack on the head and attempts to drown him in the pool, but Jack manages to grab a gun and shoot him. After dealing with the criminals and cleaning up the scene, Jack notices some damp paper and suddenly realizes how Kleiner Sr. obtained the paper for the counterfeit bills. Since $1 and $100 bills are the same size, Hubble had suggested to Kleiner Sr. that they wash the ink from $1 bills and reprint them as 100s. The ink caused environmental damage in Arkansas, prompting Kleiner Sr. to relocate and buy a farm. The feed and fertilizers on the farm contain a special chemical element that neutralizes the ink's effects, making their operation environmentally safe. Jack shares this insight with Roscoe, who informs Peard of the breakthrough. Meanwhile, 3 hitmen have tracked Oscar and he needs help. Jack advises him remotely, enabling Oscar to break through a wall into a neighboring room and escape through a window. As the mercenaries storm into the room, Oscar makes it to his car and drives off, shooting out the tires of their vehicle. The next morning, they decide to check the late trucker's house, but it has been burned down to cover the criminals' tracks. Jack suddenly realizes that the note from his brother referred to the trucker's parents' house. He heads there and discovers boxes of counterfeit money. Jack prepares to capture the entire criminal ring. Shortly afterward, Nagel calls Jack and reveals that the Arkansas crimes were orchestrated by a corrupt FBI agent, Peard. Jack had already suspected this when he saw Oscar being held hostage by Peard, Teal, and Kleiner Jr. During their conversation, it becomes clear that Kleiner Jr. has eliminated everyone in his path, including Joe, his police colleagues, the mayor, and others. His insanity is so extreme that he even went as far as executing his own father to seize control of the family business and establish a counterfeit money operation in neighboring countries. The only person he has yet to find is Hubble, whose family is now being held hostage. Kleiner Jr. gives Jack until morning to locate the escaped financier and bring him to the company's warehouse. With no other options, the former soldier turns to detective work while under constant surveillance by Peard. Jack heads to a cafe and uses his understanding of fugitive behavior to deduce Hubble's likely hiding place. To gain an edge, Jack spills hot coffee on Peard and steals a fork to puncture the tires of his car. The resulting flat tire forces Peard to stop, allowing Jack to open the trunk and find it filled with weapons. Realizing that neither side benefits from a shootout, Jack proposes they disarm. This is a ruse. Jack ends up shooting Peard, who manages to escape into a ditch. Jack then finds Hubble and learns the details of his brother's death. Meanwhile, Baker beats Oscar and locks him in a cell. Soon, a message arrives on Oscar's phone instructing him to find a safe place. The corrupt officer doesn't understand the message until a pickup truck crashes into the police station, making him a casualty of the chaos. Oscar watches with satisfaction as the officer dies and then joins Jack and Hubble in raiding the weapon safe. They are soon joined by Nagel, who had anticipated trouble and offers her assistance. They take refuge in a barbershop, devise a plan, and scout the area to locate the hostages. Just before dawn, they launch their attack on the warehouse. Nagel takes out 2 guards outside, and Jack finishes off the remaining one. Realizing they might not survive until morning, Oscar sets a fire to create a diversion. Hubble sneaks into the warehouse and guides his daughters to safety. During a fierce shootout, Nagel, Jack, and Oscar eliminate the gang members and Latin American mercenaries. Jack also frees Roscoe and Charlie, enabling their escape. Despite being a police officer, Roscoe can't stay out of the action and returns to help take down the remaining criminals. Wounded, Peard arrives for a final confrontation with Oscar, who defeats his treacherous friend and crushes him in a press. Meanwhile, Roscoe confronts the mayor, handcuffing him to a pipe. Teal tries to resist and grabs a gun, but Roscoe quickly takes him out, punishing the traitor who betrayed his city. The only ones left in the warehouse are Kleiner Jr. and Jack. Confident of his victory, Kleiner Jr. is caught off guard by Jack's sound trap. Jack attacks from behind, beats Kleiner Jr., and throws him into the burning money, eliminating him once and for all. The warehouse explodes, but Jack escapes unscathed, embodying the true hero. With Hubble and his family safe, Roscoe and Jack spend the night together. The next morning, the FBI arrives, but Jack avoids speaking with them and is forced to leave town. He says goodbye to Roscoe, promising to stay in touch and taking her phone number. Remembering how his mother gave him a bravery medal, Jack struggles to hold back tears, feeling that Joe deserved it just as much. He visits the site where his brother's body was found and buries the medal nearby. Finally, Jack bids farewell to Oscar and tries the pie he's been tempted by since day one. With his mission complete, he sets off on another cross-country journey, carrying only a toothbrush and a few $100.